Today we're going to take a look at the lover archetype, which is really interesting. Now again, if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel yet, feel free to do that because I'm going to upload a lot of content that's going to help you become a better version of yourself and also to understand people and life better. If you do subscribe, just click on the bell icon and click on all if you want to receive notifications when I upload a new video. Now, what we're going to do today, like I said, we're going to look at the balanced lover and what it is and that kind of stuff. But before we get to that, I want to explain to you the whole concept of having a dominant archetype. I've mentioned that in the previous episodes. Now, what's interesting is if you've got, let's say, 3 children, okay? Obviously, they have different personalities. Now, you can actually see how these archetypes show up in these different children. So, for example, one of them might be very emotional. They feel things quite deeply. And that would drive them. If you look at the other child, they might be a deep thinker, vivid imagination, that would be them. When it comes to the third child, they might be focused on doing things a certain way. Structure is very important for them. Now, this might not be so apparent in the other children. And one of the reasons for this is that just like we have physical talents, someone might be a naturally good runner. Now, it doesn't mean the other people can't run. It just means that they run better than most people, naturally. Now, we have the same when it comes to the archetypes. We all have the archetypes within us, but people tend to lean towards one of them. They're naturally inclined to one of the archetypes. So, for example, if you are naturally inclined to the ruler archetype, you will have natural leadership abilities. If you're naturally inclined to the lover archetype, it means that you will feel life way deeper than most people. Obviously, it goes way deeper than that, but just a little summary. Now, these are dominant archetypes, and I'm going to explain that to you by using the following example. Now, if you look on the chart that's on the screen now, you'll see that this pie chart consists of the archetypes. Now, this is an example that I made just to show you how the archetypes can show up in an individual. So this is just an example. Now, in this person, you could see the warrior in the red there isn't properly developed. It's actually pretty weak. They don't use it a lot. The ruler is a bit better. The nurturer and the magician are kind of equal. But then you look at the lover, that's like the main dominant archetype in this person. You can see that. So this archetype is used the most. That's what it means. They're tapping into it the most. And a lot of situations that requires the lover, they would have no problem with that. Okay, so for example, I'll get into this now later in the video, but let's say this particular person, the chart that you're looking at, let's say they have to get into a situation and express their feelings and become vulnerable and just share some personal stuff with them. That wouldn't be a problem for this person because they have the lover as a dominant archetype. So that's the dominant archetype. It kind of determines what your personality would be like, because that's the side of yourself that you tap into the most and that you use the most. So this is just an example. And further, if we look at this person, they would not stand strong when things go bad. Okay, they've got a very weak warrior side. So you can see that what will happen with them is they would crumble under pressure. They would not take initiative and say, no, I'll get it done, watch me. They wouldn't do that because of the weak warrior side. With the weak ruler side, it's a little bit stronger than the warrior, but the weak ruler side, would mean that they don't take ownership of their lives. They don't take responsibility, that kind of stuff. So I think you get the picture here. This is what this means. I'm just showing it to you, this example, so that you can get an idea of how these archetypes actually fit in and what I mean by saying it's your dominant archetype. Look, this person here has got all the qualities. They've got the warrior qualities, the ruler and all the others. It's just that it's not developed enough. So just like you're developing a skill, you have to practice to tap into that side of yourself. So this particular person in this example, they have to balance out their warrior. They're too soft if you look at this chart. Too soft. They need to become a little bit harder. So they're tipping into the softer side. So they're going to have to do activities that would awaken that warrior side of them a little bit. So for example, most of you know now throughout the series that I have a martial arts school and I do martial arts. So this person would actually benefit from doing martial art training because martial art training is a hard activity and that would awaken that warrior side of them and the ruler side a little bit, which would be good for them. So then the chart would be a little bit more even. Now, let's take a look at someone who's the opposite. In this chart, you can see that the warrior archetype is the dominant one here. Now, the ruler and the warrior can be seen as our harder side, where the lover and the nurturer can be seen as our softer side. So if you compare the two examples I gave you now, you'll see the other person is too soft, and this person is way too hard. Now, I just want to clarify something because I'm going to talk like this throughout the video and you'll just understand me a bit better. When I'm talking about the lover archetype and I say they would do this or this person would behave in this way, what I mean is I'm talking about the archetype. So, for example, each of these archetypes wants something else, all right? So, let me explain it to you this way. The warrior within you wants you to take action, to be strong, and to achieve things. The ruler within you wants you to become more powerful, to create a kingdom, to lead and create order. The nurturer within, that wants you to take care of other people, to provide, to nurture. The magician wants you to think deeply, gain insight, knowledge, and understanding. The lover wants you to create connections with other people, to feel to the max and experience the beauty that this life has to offer. So each archetype wants something else and does something different, right? So now, if you look at the previous person, they were run, in other words, the aspect that was in control there was the lover. So they would be orientated in seeking the things that the lover wants. That makes sense. This person is dominated by the warrior, which means they would seek and pursue things that the warrior part of us wants. So if we take the same example we used in the previous one, I said that you're in a situation where you have to talk about your feelings. The other person in the other chart would welcome that with open arms because the lover wants that. You see, the lover wants that vulnerability and connection and that expression of feelings and emotions. They want that. Well, if you look at this person, it would probably be their worst nightmare because look how underdeveloped the lover is here. One of the fears of the warrior is vulnerability. So this person wouldn't like that. In fact, they will tell you, what do you mean I have to express my feelings? I'm not going to do that, because of the vulnerability that goes with it and the perception of weakness that this person would see it as. So you can now see how these archetypes work together and how they influence our behavior and how we handle things in general. The thing that I want to get across here is you're not set. Okay, like this is who you are and that's how it is. It's kind of not how it is. You kind of evolve through your life. I mean, if you look at yourself 10 years ago, you're probably not the same anymore. You changed. Now, to explain to you how this relates to the archetypes, let's say you went through a bad breakup and it was terrible for you and you were in a lot of pain. Now, obviously the response depends on the person and what they choose to do, but here's a common thing that happens. It's because of that pain, what we do is we pull energy out of the lover archetype because that was the side of us that connected with that other person, the side of us that allowed us to be vulnerable, and we kind of feel, hey, it was the lover that got me in trouble. So what we do is we pull energy out of the lover, and then usually what happens is we put that energy into the warrior side of us. So examples could be channeling the pain of the breakup into work. You keep yourself busy and you work super hard, or you can channel it into exercise or starting a new sport or keeping yourself busy. Now, these are warrior activities. And one of the ways how we grow our archetypes is by doing activities that feed them. If we avoid activities that feed them, they become weaker. So now what's happening is you're avoiding anything that would make your lover stronger, that would make it grow. Because if it grows, you will become more vulnerable, you'll become more emotional, and things you don't want. Okay, so what you're doing is you're channeling that into warrior activities, which making the warrior stronger. It's growing inside of you now. So now the problem is you're creating an imbalance because you're pulling energy away from the soft side due to the pain that you've had, so you don't have to go through that again, and you're channeling it into the warrior. So now your warrior has got a high chance of becoming excessive and imbalanced. So you'll develop a heart of stone. And this was a defense mechanism. So this is how it plays out. Now, like I said, people handle things in many different ways. So someone else could actually throw themselves into the lover when they go through a breakup like this, making the lover even more excessive than what it already is. You see, so that is how this works. We kind of evolve through the times, okay? We're not set. And that's important. Well, it's good because it gives you hope if you feel that you're not who you want to be. You can change. You can pull energy from one side and put it in there. You can reshape yourself, which is really good. Okay, so now coming to the lover archetype. Number one, when we say lover archetype, probably the first thing that comes to mind is relationships, romance, that kind of stuff. Now, just like I said in the warrior archetype, when I say warrior, people think fighting, combat. And I said to you that yes, it's a small part of it. There's a lot to it. And that's a part of the archetype is combat and so forth. Now, the same with the lover. Relationships, romance is a part of the lover, but it's not the be all and end all. Now, I said to you the warrior is the part of action, and you could say the ruler is the part of leading. The magician is the part of thinking. Now, the lover is the part of feeling. Okay? That's the part of us that feels, that taps into emotions and sensuality, romance, connection. That's what the lover is about. And the lover, once again, like the magician, is complex. And like I said in the previous video with the ruler archetype, I said that there are obviously many levels to this, okay? And I just took the concept and condensed it. So the lover has many aspects, and it shows up differently in different people depending how the other archetypes are shaped and stuff. So it's interesting, but it goes deep. Now let's get into what the lover archetype represents within us. First, I'm going to state the obvious. Relationships, romance, and forming bonds and connections with other people is one of the priorities of the lover aspect of ourselves. Also, passion, any form of passion comes from the lover. Emotions and feelings comes from the lover. So the more developed your lover side is, the more in touch you'll be with your emotions and your feelings. And if it's deficient, obviously the more out of touch you'll be with that part of yourself. Then, next up is sensuality, which is basically the ability to experience pleasure through your senses. And that's one of the things that the lover archetype kind of drives you to is pleasure seeking. So people who are excessive in this regard have excessive pleasure seeking and can even become addicted to any form of pleasure. Now, the thing is, the lover, especially if you're dominant, you'll take pleasure in the smallest of things. I mean, if you take, for example, there's food cooking in the kitchen and that wonderful smell of the food, you would enjoy that. That's something you would literally stand and you'll be like, oh, let me just enjoy this for a second. People who are not developed in that way, the lover aspect, they wouldn't understand. Like, why on earth are you making such a fuss about this? It's just the smell. They wouldn't understand it. But to the lover, it's a big deal. You know, walking in nature, admiring the beauty of nature, it's a big deal. You know, certain textures of material, if you feel it, you feel like, wow, this really feels nice. You can experience pleasure through the senses. And that's where sensuality comes in. Now, I'm going to come back to this in a second. The lover is also the part of ourselves that's very social, because we experience that social pleasure, if you will, through the lover archetype. If this part of you is developed, you're relatively fun to be around. You're very lively, you're a bubbly individual. So that's also what's important. Now I'm going to come back to the sensuality part because that's important for the first piece here, is that seeking of pleasure. Now, if your lover archetype is balanced or it's relatively developed, then you will be able to color life in. When a deficient lover wouldn't be able to do that, their life would be black and white, very dull and boring, because the feelings, the emotions, your senses give life color, that experiencing pleasure in the smallest of things. But that can also be a double-edged sword. Like I said, the excessive lover gets controlled by their seeking of pleasure, by their emotions, and that's what we want. So the thing is, what we must understand is the mind, well, the brain, kind of lives in darkness, right? It's in your head, and it only knows what's going on outside of you, the external, because of your senses. When you touch something, it sends the impulse to the brain. It feels, okay, so this is a rough surface or a smooth surface, so you can feel through touch. The same with your smell, hearing, sight, taste. That's how you experience life. Now, the lover is intensely in touch with their senses, which makes them experience life in a much more colorful fashion. They experience the fullness of life because they live in each moment. They experience everything intensely. So that's why the lover archetype is the archetype of, you could say, joy and pleasure. And if we don't have a lot of energy in the lover archetype, we tend to be dull, numb, kind of boring individuals. Okay, and that is what I'll get into in part 2. Where on the other side, if you were too excessive, you become like addicted to pleasure. You just, all you're seeking, everything is about pleasure, 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 and making you feel good. So it depends on where you're on the spectrum again. So now when we're talking about this, is they are very in touch with their emotions. The lover feels very deeply. So they feel emotions deep. Now the thing with the emotions is this. Unfortunately, I'll get into this in part 2 when I talk about the excessive and deficient. But if we feel emotion, we can either feel it or not feel it. We can't numb the bad emotions and, increase the intensity of the good emotions. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. If we numb the bad, we numb the good. It's just how it is. Emotions are one thing. So the thing with the lover is they feel pleasure intensely, joy, happiness. But the downside is they also feel deep pain. Deep pain. That's the problem. So you feel emotions or you don't feel them. That's the catch, yeah. So they feel deeply, they connect deeply. The thing is with emotions, we need emotions to connect. We need feeling to connect. So the lover connects very deeply with people. So we need the lover archetype to form bonds, to form connection with others. If we don't have this archetype properly developed, we will struggle with intimacy. We will struggle with connection. Where if it's overly developed, we'll be clingy. We can't be alone. We have to jump from relationship to relationship. That kind of stuff, So the lover archetype is very important when it comes to connection and relationships. The balanced lover has got control over their emotions. They're not swept away by their emotions. When I spoke about the magician, I said one of the tricks or the challenges of the magician is to not get swept away by their thoughts. Now the lover has got the other problem. They mustn't be swept away by their emotions, by their feelings. So for example, someone who doesn't have a balanced lover and they've got a bit of the excess, they would fall in love with everybody they meet. Every person they meet, they're like head over heels. That would be the excessive lover. They're being swept off their feet by their emotions. Now, when I spoke about the magician, I said that they are masters of understanding deep thinking, insight, intuition. Now, the lover archetype, if it's balanced, the balanced lover is an expert at understanding feelings, emotions. Remember, your emotions are like your internal GPS, like your internal guidance system. Now, emotions are pretty complex, so I can't go too much into it in this video, but I will cover it in future videos. Now, in short, your emotions guide you in various ways. With desire, which is also a big thing about the lover, which I'll talk about in part 2, your emotions help you to reach your desires, to show you if you are on the right path or on the wrong path. And it also helps you to heal. Your emotions are like messengers that's pointing to unhealed wounds that you might hold, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, and they actually help you to heal that. So for example, when you're angry, your anger is pointing to something inside of you that needs your attention. And that's what the lover is really good at, is they feel emotion raw. They feel it intensely. So they can easily use their emotions to find out what is going on inside me. Why do I have this emotional response? They are masters of emotion. This is that part of ourselves. Where the imbalanced lover, there you either have the emotions running you, just like the excessive magician, their thoughts run them, The excessive lover, their emotions run them. They're out of control. Where the deficient lover, obviously, they don't feel a lot of emotions. They're kind of flat. They don't feel much. Now, just a little side note here. If your relationship fails, it doesn't necessarily mean that something's wrong with your lover archetype. Relationships fail for many reasons, so I wouldn't jump to that conclusion. Now, as I've said before, the lover archetype is the part of us that creates connections and bonds with other people. I said this in the warrior video, and I said that when you have excessive boundaries, which the excessive warrior tends to do if you've got an excessive warrior side, what will happen is you will not bond with people because your boundaries and your barrier, if you will, is so strong that people can't connect with you because you don't allow them in. You see, where the lover hasn't got that strong boundaries, they've got healthy boundaries so they can allow people in, and that connection, that exchange of emotion, and that allowing yourself to feel and to experience the emotions associated with how this person is making you feel, you're forming a bond, you're forming a connection. So that's important. If there's emotions involved, feelings involved, and you're allowing yourself that the emotion can flow through you, you form a connection. And this is why they form such deep bonds with people, is because of the feeling that goes with it. Where if you've got a deficient lover, you don't really form connections. Okay, you don't go that deep, you don't allow them in. So you don't connect with people because you don't allow yourself to feel. You don't allow them to come in to actually touch your heart, put it that way. And you don't allow that. So you don't connect deeply with people. And this also allows the lover to be someone who understands people, who can see from their perspective, because they can feel what you feel. They can experience the pain that you experience. So they can actually see it from your perspective. Now the lover goes very closely with the nurturer, which is the last one we're going to cover. So a lot of the stuff will relate there as well. And they can have that compassion for you because of the bond. They feel what you feel. Now, one of the struggles that the lover has got, or your lover's side, put it that way, is to not get too attached to things, because the lover tends to attach to things because of their feelings and emotions. So they struggle to let go. So, for example, when a lover, or let's put it the other side, when a deficient lover is in a relationship and the person leaves, it's not a big deal for them. It's like, yeah, I don't care. Because the bond was weak. You didn't have a strong bond with them. So for you to leave them, it's like, yeah, whatever. But someone who's got a properly developed lover, that would be painful. It's like a part of you is being ripped away. Never mind the excessive lover, then you connect like excessively. So when they leave, it's almost like you're dying, There's no sense of separate self. And that's one of the struggles that the lover has got, is not to tip into that excessive side, which I'll get into in part 2. Now, the lover part of ourselves is that part that wants you to experience heightened states of emotions. That's moments of ecstasy when you go and you feel, wow, this is so amazing. Whatever that may be. It could be physical pleasure, it could be whatever. That is the part of you that wants to feel those experiences. Like, for example, when you watch a beautiful movie and you feel that emotions rise up, you're like, that was really beautiful. That really touched me. The part of yourself that desires that is the lover. Okay, that's that side of yourself. It wants you to go into situations where you can experience that emotions. And the deficient lover obviously would stay away from those things. And that's what the lover part of ourselves want. They center themselves around these emotional states. So, for example, someone who's dominant in the lover, they would seek out these experiences. They would love, you could say, chick flicks. They would love it. Whether you're a guy or a woman, doesn't matter. You would love those softer things in life. That's the dominant archetype, is the lover. So that you could say, if we use the label, it's just easier for people to understand this. If you think of feminine qualities, you think of the lover archetype, that softer side that likes to feel emotion, likes to talk about their emotions, mind you. That would be the lover. So, for example, if you think of that connection and sharing intimate details about yourself, that personal information, the excessive lover tends to do this with a stranger. They just met someone and they tell them the maddest personal stuff because of their yearning for connection. Where the lover, the balanced lover, must learn to obviously not do that. Share things with people that you can trust. You don't want to share that information against people who can use it to hurt you. So that's important as well, with one of the lessons that the lover has to learn. As I've said before, the lover archetype is also the side of ourselves that's centered around relationships, centered around connection. And the important part here is they're passionate about it. So people who are dominant in the lover, they'll be very passionate about relationships, about connection, and they'll seek it out. They'll be a very big priority for them. Where if you look at someone like a warrior, if someone is dominant and warrior, relationships wouldn't probably be on their to-do list in the near future. Their things would be achieving things, achievement, being strong, being powerful. That would be theirs, okay? So the relationship and connection would be a very big priority for the lover dominant archetype. And also it would be, how does something make me feel? Okay, that's very important. The dominant lover archetype, when they have to make a decision, they would ask themselves, how would this make me feel? Rather than does it make logical sense, you know? Where the other archetypes might think more logically, the lover would think with emotion. They say, will this make me feel good? Okay? If no, I'm not interested. If yes, well, then I'll kind of go with it. So they think a little bit differently. They think with the heart and not the mind, put it that way. So the lover has to learn to balance it with the other archetypes, because obviously everything that makes you feel good is not always good for you. You have to learn to bring the logic in and balance it out. Once again, balance. That's what the lover has to learn. Now, it's important to mention that the balanced lover has got healthy boundaries, where the imbalanced lover obviously lacks healthy boundaries, but I'll explain that and get into it in part 2. Now, in the other videos, I mentioned briefly when the archetypes start to develop in children. When it comes to the lover archetype, it usually starts to develop the moment the child learns to crawl, which is around about 6 to 7 months old. And the period of this in general is about 6 months to around about 2 years. And during this period, the child is all sensation, needs, and desires. This is when the child starts to crawl around and they want to put everything in their mouth and touch everything. They want to explore. And this is when they start to really get in touch with their senses, and they're starting to develop experiencing life through their senses. And it's a really interesting time. They also get more in touch with their feelings and all that kind of stuff. And you'll see that this sensation, this sensuality that's starting to build in the child, experiencing pleasure through the senses, that actually inspires the movement. And you could say it inspires locomotion. They start crawling everywhere, walking everywhere, and that gives way to desires and stuff like that. Now, just to recap again, the lover archetype is lovers of life. They want to experience pleasure, they want to connect, they want to feel alive with emotion. And remember, emotions makes us feel alive. If we don't have emotions, you feel like a robot. I mean, there's no ups, there's no downs. And yes, the downs suck, you know, it's not nice. But without the downs, there's no ups. Okay, so we need to experience you could say, the full spectrum of emotions. If there's an example that it describes this best, it would be the movie called Equilibrium. If you haven't seen that, you can check it out, where the whole thing, just quick recap, is the government has this drug and you have to take the drug and it numbs your emotions. And if you show emotions and feeling, it's a crime. And then obviously it's punishable by death and all sorts of stuff. So it's quite cool to see that, because it shows you what life would be like without emotion. And it makes you sit up straight and you're like, wow, we take it for granted because of the pain that we feel in our lives, the pain of the downs. We kind of think emotions are bad because a lot of times we find ourselves down in the dumps because of the bad emotions. And a lot of times the bad emotions are kind of self-created, you know, through resistance to what is, by not dealing with your past, not dealing with your wounds. These kind of things just increase the frequency of the negative emotions in our life. So we have to do the work. Then we'll have less of the negative emotions and more of the positive emotions. But it kind of snowballs. When it comes to emotions, the thing is, the more negative emotions you harbor within inside yourself, the more negative emotions you'll experience in the external. And I'll make videos about this in the future. But the point is, we have to clean up our emotional, you could say, emotional self, our emotional life. We have to clean it up every now and then. Otherwise, it gets dirty, it gets toxic, and then we've got a problem. A lot of times we experience emotions, and instead of expressing it, we just keep it down, we keep it inside. And that corrupts us on the inside. It makes us negative, it makes us angry, it makes us frustrated individual. And we have to learn to clean that up every now and then. Just clean house a little bit. And that's very important. Then you'll experience more pleasure. But emotions is a beautiful thing. Feeling is a beautiful thing. The lover archetype is a beautiful thing. It's wonderful. It gives life color. It gives life, you could say, a little bit more meaning for you, where you experience that amazing feeling of developing a strong connection with someone, experiencing the emotions of feeling appreciated, of just seeing the beauty of life. You know, the lover archetype inside of us sees the beauty in the smallest things. For example, if you look at a snowflake is so intricate, but it's temporary. I mean, you don't even notice a single snowflake. The chances of you doing that is very slim. But still, look at the intricacy, look at the beauty, the detail. The lover archetype within us would look at that and be like, wow, that is amazing. And they would obsess about it and be like, wow, this is so beautiful. And do you know what this means? What that means is if something so temporary, so small, has got so much detail, do you know how much detail I must have? Do you know how much detail the rest of existence must have? They really look into things quite deeply when it comes to feeling and emotion. It's really awesome. And that's what we're going to look at in part two, is to try and get this part of ourselves balanced so that we can learn to tap into the emotional side, the connection side, have more stable relationships, whether it's a friendship or a romantic relationship, and get more in touch with our emotional nature so we can feel things more vividly, we can experience life with more color so it's not so dull. That's the goal of the lover archetype.